Alice in Wonderland, Chapter 1. Down the Rabbit Hole. Alice was beginning to get very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank, and of having nothing to do. Once or twice she'd peeped into the book her sister was reading, but it had no pictures of conversations in it. And what is the use of a book, thought Alice, without pictures or conversations? So she was considering in her own mind, as well as she could, but for the hot day made her feel very sleepy and stupid, whether the pleasure of making a daisy chain would be worth the trouble of getting up and picking daisies, when suddenly a white rabbit with pink eyes ran close by to her. There was nothing so very remarkable in that, nor did Alice think it was so very much out of the way to hear the rabbit say to itself, "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, I shall be too late." When she thought it over afterwards, it occurred to her that she ought to have wondered at this, but at the time it seemed quite natural. But when the rabbit actually took a watch out of its waistcoat pocket, looked at it, and then hurried on, Alice started to her feet, for it flashed across her mind that she had never before seen a rabbit with either a waistcoat pocket or a watch to take out of it. And burning with curiosity, she ran across the field after it, and was just in time to see it pop down a large rabbit hole under the hedge. In another moment down went Alice after it, never once considering how in the world she was going to get out again. The rabbit hole went straight down on, like a tunnel for some way, and then dipped suddenly down, so suddenly that Alice had not a moment to think about stopping herself before she found herself falling down what seemed to be a very deep well. Either the well was very deep, or she fell very slowly, for she had plenty of time as she went down to look about her, and to wonder what was going to happen next. First, she tried to look down and make out what she was coming to, but it was too dark to see anything. Then she noticed that at the sides of the well, and noticed that they were filled with cupboards and bookshelves. And here and there she saw maps and drawings and pictures hung up on pegs. She took down a jar from one of the shelves as she passed. It was labeled orange marmalade, but to her great disappointment it was empty. She did not like to drop the jar for fear of killing somebody underneath, so managed to put it into one of the cupboards as she passed it. Well, thought Alice to herself, after such a fall as this I shall think nothing of tumbling downstairs. How brave they'll all think of me at home. Why, I wouldn't say anything about it, even if I fell off the top of the house. Which is very likely true. Down and down and down. Would the fall never come to an end? I wonder how many miles I've fallen by this time, she said aloud. I must be getting somewhere near the center of the earth. Let me see. That would be 4,000 miles down, I think. For you see, Alice had learnt several things of this sort in her lessons in the schoolroom, and thought this was a very good opportunity for showing off her knowledge, as there was no one to listen to her. Still, it was good practice to say it over. Yes, that's about the right distance, but then I wonder what latitude or longitude I've gotten to. Alice had not the slightest idea what latitude was, nor longitude either, but she thought they were nice grand words to say. Presently she began again. I wonder if I shall fall right through the earth. How funny it'll seem to come out among the people that walk with their heads downwards. The antipathies, I think. She was rather glad there was no one listening this time, as it didn't sound at all like the right word. But I shall have to ask them what the name of the country is, you know. Please, ma'am, is this New Zealand or Australia? And she tried to curtsy as she spoke. Fancy curtsying as you're falling through the air. Do you think you could manage it? And what an ignorant little girl she'll think me for asking. No, it'll never do to ask. Perhaps I shall see it written up somewhere. Down and down and down, and there was nothing else to do, so Alice soon began talking again. Dinah'll miss me very much tonight, I should think. Dinah was the cat. I hope they'll remember her saucer of milk in tea time. Dinah, my dear, I wish you were down here with me. There are no mice in the air, I'm afraid, but you might catch a bat. And that's very much like a mouse, you know. But do cats cat bats, I wonder? And here Alice began to get rather sleepy, and went on saying to herself in the dreamy sort of way, do cats bats? Do cats cat bats? And sometimes do bats cat cats? For you see, as she couldn't answer either question, it didn't matter much which way she put it. She felt like she was dozing off, and had just begun to dream, that she was walking hand in hand with Dinah, and was saying to her very earnestly, "Now, Dinah, tell me the truth. Did you eat a bat?" With a suddenly thump, thump, she came down on a heap of sticks and dry leaves, and the fall was over. Alice was not a bit hurt, and she jumped up to her feet in a moment. She looked up, but it was all dark overhead. Before her was another long passage, and the white rabbit was still in sight, hurrying down it. There was not a moment to be lost. Away went Alice, like the wind, and was just in time to hear it say as it turned the corner, "Oh, my ears are whiskers, how late it's getting." She was close behind it when she turned the corner, but the rabbit was no longer to be seen. She found herself in a long, low hall, which was lit by a row of lamps from the roof. There were doors all around the hall, but they were all locked, and when Alice had been all the way down one side and up the other trying every door, she walked sadly down the middle, wondering how she was ever going to get out again. Suddenly she came upon a little three-legged table made of solid glass. There was nothing on it but a tiny golden key, and Alice's first idea was that this might belong to one of the doors of the hall. But alas, either the locks were too large or the key was too small. But at any rate, it would not open any of them. However, on the second round she came upon a low curtain she had not noticed before, and behind it was a little door about 15 inches high. She tried the little golden key in the lock, and to her great delight it fit. Alice opened the door and found that it led into a small passage, not much larger than a rat hole. She knelt down and looked along the passage into the loveliest garden you ever saw. How she longed to get out of that dark hall and wander amongst the beds of bright flowers and cool fountains. But she found she could not even get her head through the doorway. And even if my head would go through, thought poor Alice, it'd be of very little use without my shoulders. Oh, how I wish I could shut up like a telescope. I think I could, if only I knew how to begin. For you see, so many out-of-the-way things had happened lately that Alice had begun to think a very few things were indeed really impossible. There seemed to be no use in waiting by the little door, so she went back to the table, half hoping she might find another key on it, or at any rate a book of rules for shutting people up like telescopes. This time she found a little bottle on it, which it certainly was not there before, said Alice. And tied around the neck of the bottle was a paper with the words, "Drink me," beautifully printed on large letters. It's all very well to say "drink me," but the little wise Alice was not going to do that in a hurry. "No, I'll look first," she said, "and see whether it's marked poison or not." For she had read several nice little stories about children who had got burnt and eaten up by wild beasts, and other unpleasant things, all because they would not remember the simple rule their friends had taught them, such as that a red-hot poker will burn you if you hold on it too long, and if you cut your fingers very deeply with a knife, it usually bleeds. She had never forgotten that. If you drink from a bottle marked poison, it is almost certainly to disagree with you, sooner or later. However, this bottle was not marked poison, so Alice ventured to taste it, and finding it very nice, in fact, it had a sort of mixed flavor of cherry tart, custard, pineapple, roast turkey, toffee, and hot buttered toast. She very soon finished it off. "What a curious feeling," said Alice. "I must be shutting up like a telescope." And so it was indeed. She was now only 10 inches high, and her face brightened up at the thought that she was now the right size for going through the little door into the lovely garden. First, however, she waited for a few minutes to see if she was going to shrink any further. She felt a little nervous about this, for it might end, said Alice to herself. My going out altogether, like a candle. I wonder what I should be like then. And she tried to fancy what a flame of a candle looked like after the candle was blown out, for she could not remember ever having seen such a thing. After a while, finding that nothing more happened, she decided on going into the garden at once. But alas, poor Alice, she had gotten to the door and found that she had forgotten the golden key. And when she went back to the table for it, she found she could not possibly reach it. She could see it quite plainly through the glass, and she tried her best to climb up on the legs of one of the table, but it was too slippery, and when she had tired herself out with trying, the poor little thing sat down and cried. Come now, there's no use in crying like that, said Alice to herself, rather sharply. I advise you to leave off this minute. She generally gave herself very good advice, though she very seldom followed it, and sometimes she scolded herself so severely as to bring tears to her eyes. And once she remembered trying to box her own ears for having cheated herself in a game of croquet she was playing against herself. For this curious child was very fond of pretending to be two people. But it's no use now, thought poor Alice, to pretend to be two people, or there's hardly enough of me left to make one respectable person. Soon her eyes fell on a little glass box that was lying under the table. She opened it and found that a very small cake, on which the words "Eat me" were beautifully marked in currants. "Well, I'll eat it," said Alice. "If it makes me grow larger, I can reach the key, and if it makes me go smaller, I can creep under the door. So either way, I'll get into the garden. I don't care what happens." She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, "Which way, which way?" holding her hand on the top of her head to feel which way it was growing. She was rather quite surprised to find that she remained the same size. It's to be sure that's generally what happens when one eats cakes, but Alice had gotten much used to the way of expecting nothing out of the way things to happen, that it seemed quite dull and stupid for life to go on in a common way. So she set to work and very soon finished off the cake. Alice in Wonderland, Chapter 2. The Pool of Tears. "Cressier and Cressier," cried Alice. She was so much surprised that for the moment she was quite forgot how to speak good English. "Now I'm opening out like the largest telescope that ever was. Goodbye, feet." For when she looked down at her feet, they seemed to be almost out of sight. They were getting so far off. "Oh, my poor little feet. I wonder who will put on your shoes and stockings for you now, dear. I'm sure I shan't be able to. I shall be a great deal too far off to trouble myself about you. You must manage the best way you can. But I must be kind to them," thought Alice. "Perhaps they won't walk the way I want to. Let me see. I'll give them a new pair of boots every Christmas." She went on planning to herself how she would manage it. "They must go by the carrier," she thought. "And how funny they'll seem, sending presents to one's own feet. And how odd the directions will look. Alice's right foot, Esquire. Hearthrug, near the fender, with Alice's love." Oh dear, what nonsense I'm talking. Just at this moment her head struck against the roof of the hall. In fact, she was now rather more than 9 feet tall, and she at once took up the little golden key and hurried off to the garden door. Poor Alice! It was as much as she could do, lying down on one side, to look through to the garden with one eye. But to get through was more hopeless than ever. She sat down and began to cry. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," said Alice. "A great girl like you," she might as well say this, "to go on crying in this way. Stop it this moment, I tell you." But she went on all the same, shedding gallons of tears, until there was a little pool around her, about 4 inches deep and reaching down the hall. After a time she heard a little patter of feet in the distance, and she hastily dried her eyes to see what was coming. It was the White Rabbit returning, splendidly dressed, with a pair of white kid's gloves on one hand and a large fan in the other. He came trotting down along in a great hurry, muttering to himself as he came, "Oh, the Duchess, oh, won't she be savage if I kept her waiting." Alice felt so desperate that she was ready to ask for help of anyone. So when the rabbit came near her, she began in a low, timid voice, "If you please, sir." The rabbit started violently, dropping the white kid's glove and the fan, and scurried away into the darkness as hard as he could go. Alice took up the fan and glove, and as the hall was very hot, she kept fanning herself all the time she went on talking. "Dear, dear, how queer everything is today, and yesterday things went on just as usual. I wonder if I've been changed in the night. Let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost think I can remember feeling a little different. But if I'm not the same, the next question is, who in the world am I? That's a great puzzle." She began thinking over all the children she knew that were of the same age as herself, to see if she could have changed into any of them. "I'm sure I'm not Ada," she said, "for her hair goes into long ringlets, and mine doesn't go into ringlets at all. And I'm sure I can't be Mabel, for I know all sorts of things, and she knows such a very little. Besides, she's she, and I'm I, and oh dear, how puzzling it all is. I'll try if I know all the things I used to know. Let me see, 4 times 5 is 12, and 4 times 6 is 13, and 4 times 7 is... oh dear." Shall never get to 20 at this rate. However, the multiplication table don't signify. Let's try geography. London is the capital of Paris, and Paris is the capital of Rome, and Rome... No, that's all wrong. I'm certain. I must have been changed for Mabel. I'll try and say, how doth the little... She crossed her hands on her lap, as if she were saying lessons, and began to repeat it, but her voice sounded hoarse and strange, and the words did not come out the same way they used to. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerfully he seems to grin, how neatly spread his claws, and welcome little fish in, with gently smiling jaws. I'm sure those are not the right words, said poor Alice, and her eyes filled with tears again. She went on. I must be Mabel after all. Shall have to go and live in that poky little house, and have next to no toys to play with, no, ever so many lessons to learn. No, I've made up my mind about it. If I'm Mabel, I'll stay down here. It'll be no use their putting their heads down and saying, come up again, dear. I shall only look up and say, who am I then? Tell me that first. And then, if I like the person, I'll come up. And if not, I'll stay down here till I become somebody else. But oh dear, she cried, with a sudden burst of tears, I do wish they would put their heads down. I'm so very tired of being all alone here. As she said this, she looked down at her hand, and was surprised to see that she had put on one of the little rabbit's gloves while she was talking. How can I have done that, she thought. I must be growing small again. She got up and went to the table to measure herself by it, and found that as nearly as she could guess she was now about 2 feet high, and was going on shrinking rapidly. She soon found out that the cause of this was the fan she was holding, and dropped it hastily, just in time to save herself from shrinking away altogether. That was a narrow escape, said Alice, a good deal frightened at the sudden change, but very glad to find herself still in existence. And now for the garden. And she ran with all speed back to the little door, but alas, the little door was shut again, and the little golden key was lying on the glass table as before. And things are as worse as ever, thought the poor child, for I was never so small as this before, never. I declare it's too bad that it is. And as she said these words, her foot slipped, and in another moment, splash! She was up to the chin in salt water. Her first idea was that she had somehow fallen into the sea. And in that case, I can go back by railway, she said to herself. Alice had been to the seaside once in her life, and had come to the general conclusion that wherever you go on the English coast, you find a number of bathing machines in the sea, some children digging at the sand with wooden spades. Then a row of lodging houses, and behind them a railway station. However, she soon made out that she was in the pool of tears which she had wept when she was about 9 feet high. I wish I hadn't cried so much, said Alice, as she swam about, trying to find her way out. I shall be punished for it now, I suppose, by being drowned in my own tears. That will be a queer thing, to be sure. However, everything is queer today. Just then she heard something splashing about in the pool a little way off, and she swam nearer to make it out what it was. At first she thought it was a walrus or hippopotamus, but then remembered how small she was now, and she soon made out that it was only a mouse that had slipped, like in herself. Would it be of any use now, she thought, to speak to the mouse? Everything is so out of the way down here that I should think very likely it can talk. At any rate, there's no harm trying. So she began, Oh, mouse, do you know any way out of this pool? I am very tired of swimming about here, O mouse. Alice thought this might be the right way to speak to a mouse, but she had never done such a thing before, though she remembered having seen in her little brother's Latin grammar, a mouse of a mouse to a mouse, oh mouse. The mouse looked at her rather inquisitively, and seemed to her to wink with one of its little eyes, but it said nothing. Perhaps it doesn't understand English, thought Alice. I dare say it's a French mouse come over with William the Conqueror. For with all her knowledge of history, Alice had no idea or very clear notion how long ago anything had happened. So she began again, Où est ma chatte? Which was the very first sentence in her French lesson book. The mouse gave a very sudden leap out of the water, and seemed to quiver all over with fright. Oh, I beg your pardon, cried Alice hastily, afraid that she had hurt the poor animal's feelings. I forgot you didn't like cats. Not like cats, cried the mouse, in a shrill, passionate voice. Would you like cats if you were me? Well, perhaps not, said Alice, in a soothing tone. Don't be angry about it. And yet I wish I could show you our cat, Dina. I think you'd take a fancy cat if you could only see her. She's such a dear, quiet thing. Alice went on, half to herself as she swam lazily about in the pool. And she sits purring so nicely by the fire, licking her paws and washing her face, and she is such a nice, soft thing to nurse. And she's such a capital one for catching mice. Oh, I beg your pardon, cried Alice again, for this time the mouse was bristling all over, and she felt certain it must really be offended. We won't talk about her any more if you'd rather not. We indeed, cried the mouse, who was trembling down to the end of his tail, as if I would talk about such a subject. Our family always hated cats. Nasty, low, vulgar things. Don't let me hear the name again. I won't indeed, said Alice, in a great hurry to change the subject of conversation. Are you fond of dogs? The mouse didn't answer, so Alice went on eagerly. There is such a nice dog near our house. I would like to show you. A little bright-eyed terrier, with, such long, curly brown hair. And it'll fetch things when you throw them, and it'll sit up and beg for its dinner. All sorts of things. I can't remember half of them, and it belongs to a farmer, And he says it's so useful it's worth £200. He says it kills all the rat— And oh dear, cried Alice in a sorrowful tone, I'm afraid I've offended it again. For the mouse was swimming away from her as hard as it could, and making quite a commotion in the pool as it went. So she called softly after it, Mouse dear, do come back again, and we won't talk about cats or dogs either, if you don't like them. When the mouse heard this, it turned around and swam slowly back to her. Its face was quite pale, with passion, Alice had supposed. And it said in a low, trembling voice, Let us get to shore, then I'll show you my history, and you'll understand why I hate cats and dogs. It was high time to go, for the pool was getting quite crowded with the birds and animals that had fallen into it. There was a duck and a dodo, a lory and an eaglet, and several other curious creatures. Alice led the way, and the whole party swam to the shore. Alice in Wonderland, Chapter 3. A Caucus-Race and a Long Tail. They were indeed a queer-looking party that assembled on the bank. The birds with bedraggled feathers, and the animals with their fur clinging close to them, and all dripping wet, cross, and uncomfortable. The first question, of course, was how to get dry again. They had a consultation about this. After a few minutes, it seemed quite natural to Alice to find herself talking familiarly with them, as if she had known them all her life. Indeed, she had quite a long argument with the lory, who was at last turned sulky, and would only say, I'm older than you, and must know better. And this Alice would not allow. Without knowing how old it was, and as the lory positively refused to tell its age, there was no more to be said. At last the mouse, who seemed to be a person of some authority among them, called out, Sit down, all of you, and listen to me. I'll soon make you dry enough. They all sat down at once. It was a large ring, and with the mouse in the middle. Alice kept her eyes anxiously fixed on it. For she felt sure she would catch a bad cold if she did not get dry very soon. Said the mouse, with an important air. Are you all ready? This is the driest thing I know. Silence all round, if you please. William the Conqueror, whose cause was favored by the Pope, was soon submitted to by the English, who wanted leaders, and had been, of late, much accustomed to usurpation and conquest. Edwin and Morcar, with Earls of Mercia and Northumbria. Ugh, said the lory, with a shiver. I beg your pardon, said the mouse, frowning, but very politely. Did you speak? Not I, said the lory, hastily. I thought you did, said the mouse. I'll proceed. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, declared for him, and even Stigand, the patriotic Archbishop of Canterbury, found it advisable— Found what? Said the duck. Found it, said the mouse, rather crossly. Of course you know what it means. I know what it means well enough when I find a thing, said the duck. It's generally a frog or a worm. The question is, what did the Archbishop find? The mouse did not notice this question, but hurriedly went on. Found it advisable to go with Edgar Althling to meet William and offer him the ground. William's conduct at first was moderate, but the insolence of his Normans... How are you getting on, my dear? It continued, turning to Alice as it spoke. As what as ever, said Alice in a melancholy tone. It doesn't seem to dry me at all. In that case, said the dodo solemnly, rising to its feet, I move that the meeting adjourn for an immediate adoption of more energetic remedies. Speak English, said the eaglet. I don't know the meaning of half those long words. What's more, I don't know you do either. And the eaglet bent down its head to hide a smile. Some of the other birds tittered audibly. What I was going to say, said the dodo, in an offended tone, was that the best thing to get us dry would be a Caucus-Race. What is a Caucus-Race? Said Alice, not that she much wanted to know, but that the dodo had paused as if it thought somebody might, or ought, to speak, and no one else seemed inclined to do anything. Why, said the dodo, the best way to explain it is to do it. And as you might like to try the thing yourself some winter day, I will tell you how the dodo managed it. First, it marked out a race course, in a sort of circle. The exact shape doesn't matter, it said. And then all the party were placed along the course here and there. There was no 1, 2, 3, and away, but they began running when they liked, and left off when they liked, so that it was not easy to know when the race was over. However, that when they had been running half an hour or so, and were quite dry again, the dodo suddenly called out, "The race is over!" And they all crowded around, panting and asking, "But who has won?" This question the dodo could not answer, without a great deal of thought, and it sat for a while, with one finger pressed upon its forehead, the position in which you usually see Shakespeare in the pictures of him, while the rest waited in silence. At last the dodo said, "Everyone has won, and all must have prizes." "But who's to give the prizes?" Quite a chorus of voices asked. "Why, she, of course," said the dodo, pointing to Alice with one finger, and the whole party at once crowded around her, calling out in a confused way, "Prizes! Prizes!" Alice had no idea what to do, and in despair she put her hand in her pocket and pulled out a box of comfits, luckily the salt water had not gotten into it, and handed them round as prizes. There was exactly one apiece, all round. "But she must have a prize herself, you know," said the mouse. "Of course," the dodo replied very gravely. "What else have you got in your pockets?" he went on, turning to Alice. "Only a thimble," said Alice. "Hand it over here," said the dodo. They all crowded round her once more, while the dodo solemnly presented the thimble, saying, "We beg your acceptance of this elegant thimble." And when it had finished its short speech, they all cheered. Alice thought the whole thing very absurd, but they all looked so grave that she did not dare to laugh, and as she could not think of anything to say, she simply bowed and took the thimble, looking as solemn as she could. The next thing was to eat the comfits. This caused some noise and confusion, as the large birds complained that they could not taste theirs, and the small ones choked and had to be patted on the back. However, it was over at last, and they sat down again in a ring and begged the mouse to tell them something more. "You promised to tell me your history, you know," said Alice. "And why is it you hate C and D?" she added in a whisper, half afraid that it might get offended again. "Mine is a long and sad tale," said the mouse, turning to Alice and sighing. "It is a long tale, certainly," said Alice, looking down with wonder at the mouse's tail. "But why do you call it sad?" And she kept on puzzling about it while the mouse was speaking, so that her idea of the tale was something like this. Furry said to a mouse that he met in the house, "Let us both go in the law. I will prosecute you. Come, I'll take no denial. We must have a trial, for really this morning I've nothing to do." Said the mouse to the cat, "Such a trial, yes sir, with no jury or judge would be wasting our breath." "I'll be judge, I'll be jury," said cunning old Furry. "I'll try the whole cause and condemn you to death." "You were not attending," said the mouse to Alice severely. "What are you thinking of?" "I beg your pardon," said Alice very humbly. "You've got to the fifth bend, I think." "I have not!" cried the mouse, sharply and very angrily. "Not?" said Alice, always ready to make herself useful, and looking anxiously about her. "Oh, do let me help undo it." "I shall do nothing of the sort," said the mouse, getting up and walking away. "You insult me by talking such nonsense." "I didn't mean it," pleaded poor Alice, "but you're so easily offended, you know." The mouse only growled in reply. Please come back and finish your story, Alice called after it. The others all joined in chorus. Yes, please do. But the mouse only shook its head impatiently and walked a little quicker. What a pity it wouldn't stay, sighed the lory, as soon as it was out of sight. And an old crab took the opportunity of saying to her daughter, "Ah, my dear, let this be a lesson to never lose your temper." "Hold your tongue, Ma," said the young crab, a little snappishly. "You're enough to try the patience of an oyster." "I wish I had our dinner here. I know I do," said Alice aloud, addressing nobody in particular. She'd soon fetch it back. "And who is Dinah, if I might venture to ask the question?" said the lory. Alice replied eagerly, for she was always ready to talk about her pet. "Dinah's our cat, and she's such a capital one for catching mice you can't think. Oh, I wish you could see her after the birds. Why, she'll eat a little bird as soon as look at it." This speech caused a remarkable sensation among the party. Some of the birds hurried off at once. One old magpie began wrapping itself up very carefully, remarking, "I really must be getting home. The night air doesn't suit my throat." And a canary called out in a trembling voice to its children, "Come away, my dears. It's high time you were all in bed." On various pretexts they all moved off, and Alice was soon left alone. "Wish I hadn't mentioned Dinah," she said to herself in a melancholy tone. "Nobody seems to like her down here, and I'm sure she's the best cat in the world. Oh, my dear Dinah, I wonder if I shall ever see you any more." And here poor Alice began to cry again, for she felt very lonely and low-spirited. In a little while, however, she again heard a little patter of footsteps in the distance. She looked up eagerly, half hoping that the mouse had changed his mind and was coming back to finish his story. Chapter 4. The Rabbit Sends a Little Bill. It was the White Rabbit, trotting slowly back again, and looking anxiously about as it went, as if it had lost something. And she heard it mutter to itself, the Duchess, oh my dear paws, oh my fur and whiskers, she'll get me executed, as sure as ferrets are ferrets. Where can I have dropped them, I wonder?" Alice guessed in a moment that he was looking for the fan and a pair of white kid gloves, and she was very good-naturedly began hunting around for them. But they were nowhere to be seen. Everything seemed to have changed since her swim in the pool. And the great hall and the glass table and the little door had vanished completely. Very soon the rabbit noticed Alice as she went hunting about, and called out to her in an angry tone, "Why, Marianne, what are you doing out here? Run home this very minute and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan. Quick, now!" And Alice was so much frightened that she took off at once in a direction it pointed to, without trying to explain the mistake that it had made. "He took me for his housemaid," she said to herself as she ran. "How surprised he'll be when he finds out who I am. But I'd better take him his fan and gloves, that is, if I can find them." As she said this, she came upon a little neat house, on the door of which was a brass plate with the name W. Rabbit engraved on it. She went in without a knock, and hurried upstairs, in great fear lest she should meet the real Marianne, and be turned out of the house before she found the fan and gloves. "How queer it seems," she said to herself, "to be going messages for a rabbit. I suppose Dinah'll send me on messages next." And she began fancying the sort of thing that would happen. "Miss Alice, come here directly and get ready for your walk." "Coming in a minute, nurse, but I've got to watch this mouse hole till Dinah comes back, and see that the mouse doesn't get out." Only I don't think, Alice went on, that they'd let Dinah stop in the house if it became ordering people like that. By this time she'd found her way into a tidy little room with a table in the window, and on it, as she'd hoped, a fan and 2 or 3 pairs of tiny white kid gloves. She took up the fan and a pair of the gloves, and was just going to leave the room when her eyes fell upon a little bottle that stood near the looking-glass. There was no label this time, with the words "Drink me," but nevertheless she uncorked it, put it to her lips. "I know something interesting will happen," she said to herself, "whenever I eat or drink anything. So I'll just see what this little bottle does. I do hope it'll make me grow large again, for really I am quite tired of being a tiny little thing." It did so, and much sooner than she had expected. Before she had drunk half the bottle, she found her head pressed against the ceiling, and had to stoop to save her neck from being broken. She hastily put down the bottle, saying to herself, "That is quite enough. I hope I shan't grow any more. As it is, I can't get out the door. I do wish I hadn't drunk so much." Alas, it was too late to wish that. She went quite on growing, and very soon had to kneel down on the floor. In another minute there was not even room for this, and she tried the effect of laying down, with one elbow against the door, and the other arm curled around her head. Still, she went on growing, and as a last resource she put one arm out of the window and one foot up the chimney and said to herself, "Now I can do no more. Whatever happens, what will become of me?" Luckily for Alice, the little metal bottle now had its full effect, and she grew no larger. Still, it was very uncomfortable, and as there seemed to be no sort of chance of her ever getting out of the room again, no wonder she felt unhappy. It was much pleasanter at home, thought poor Alice, when one wasn't always growing smaller and larger, and being ordered about by mice and rabbits. I wish I hadn't gone down the rabbit hole. And yet, it's rather curious, this sort of life. I do wonder what can happen to me. When I used to read fairy tales, I fancied that this sort of thing never happened. And now here I am in the middle of one. There ought to be a book written about me. There ought. And when I grow up, I'll write one, but I'm grown up now, she added in a sorrowful tone. At least there's no room to grow up any more here. But then, thought Alice, shall I never get any older than I am now? That'll be a comfort one way, never to be an old woman, but then, always to have lessons to learn. Oh, I shouldn't like that. Oh, you foolish Alice, she answered herself. How can you learn lessons in here? Why, there's hardly room for you, and no room at all for any lesson books. And so she went on, taking first one side and then the other, and making quite a conversation of it all together. But after a few minutes she heard a voice, and stopped and listened. "Marianne, Marianne," said the voice, "fetch me my gloves this moment." Then came a little pattering of feet on the stairs. Alice knew it was the rabbit coming to look for her, and she trembled till she shook the house, quite forgetting that she was now about 1,000 times as large as the rabbit, and had no reason to be afraid of it. Presently the rabbit came up to the door and tried to open it, but as the door opened inwards and Alice's elbow was pressed hard against it, that attempt proved a failure. Alice heard it say to herself, then I'll go around and get in at the window. That you won't, thought Alice, and after waiting till she fancied she heard the rabbit just under the window, she suddenly spread out her hand and made a snatch in the air. She did not get hold of anything, but she heard a little shriek and a fall and a crash of broken glass, from which she concluded that it was just possible it had fallen into a cucumber frame, or something of the sort. Next came an angry voice, the rabbit's, "Pat, Pat, where are you?" And then a voice she had never heard before. "Sure then I'm here, digging for apples, your honor." "Digging for apples indeed," said the angry rabbit. "Here, come and help me out of this." Sounds of more broken glass. "Now tell me, Pat, what's that in the window?" "For sure an arm, your honor." He pronounced it arm. "An arm, you goose! Whoever saw one that size? Why, Bill's the whole window." "Sure does, your honor. But it's an arm, all that." "Well, it's got no business there, at any rate. Go and take it away." There was a long silence after this, and Alice could only hear whispers now, and then such as, "Sure I don't like it, your honor, at all, at all." "Do as I tell you, you coward." And at last she spread out her hand again, and made another snatch in the air. This time there were 2 little shrieks, and more sounds of broken glass. What a number of cucumber frames there must be, thought Alice. Wonder what they'll do next. As for pulling me out of the window, I only wish they could. I'm sure I don't want to stay in here any longer. She waited for some time without hearing anything more. At last came a rumble of little cartwheels, and a sound of a good many voices talking all together. She made out the words, "Where's the other ladder? Why, I hadn't to bring but one. Bill's got the other. Bill, fetch it here, lad. Here, put 'em up in the corner. No, tie 'em together first. They don't reach half as high enough yet. Oh, they'll do well enough. Don't be particular. Here, Bill, catch hold of this rope. Will the roof bear? Mind that loose slate. Oh, it's coming down. Heads below," and a loud crash. Now who did that? It was Bill, I fancy. "Who's to go down the chimney?" Nay, I shan't. You do it." "That I won't do." "Then Bill's got to go down. Here, Bill, the master says you've got to go down the chimney." "Oh, Bill's got to come down the chimney, has he?" said Alice to herself. "Why, they seem to put everything upon Bill. I wouldn't be in a Bill's place for a good deal. This fireplace is narrow, to be sure, but I think I can kick a little." She drew her foot as far down the chimney as she could, and waited till she heard a little animal. She couldn't guess what sort it was, scratching and scrambling down the chimney above her, then saying to herself, "This is Bill." She gave one sharp kick, and waited to see what would happen next. The first thing she heard was a general chorus of, "There goes Bill." Then the rabbit's voice alone, "Catch him, you by the hedge." Then silence, and then another confusion of voices. "Hold up his head, brandy now. Don't choke him. How was it, old fellow? What happened to you? Tell us all about it." Last came a feeble squeaking voice. "That's Bill," thought Alice. Well, I hardly know. No more, thank you. I'm better now. But I'm a deal too flustered to tell you. All I know is something comes at me, like a jack-in-the-box. I go up, like a skyrocket. So you did, old fellow, said the others. We must burn the house down, said the rabbit's voice, and Alice called out as she could, If you do, I'll set dinner on you. There was a silence, instantly a dead silence, and Alice thought to herself, I wonder what they will do next. If they had any sense, they'd take the roof off. After a minute or two, they began moving about again, and Alice heard the rabbit say, A barrowful will do, to begin with. A barrowful of what? Thought Alice. But she had not long doubt, for the next moment a shower of little pebbles came raining in the windows, and some hit her in the face. I'll put a stop to this, she said to herself, and shouted, You'd better not do that again, which produced another dead silence. Alice noticed with some surprise that the pebbles were all turning into little cakes as they lay on the floor, and a bright idea came into her head. If I eat one of those cakes, she thought, it'll sure make a change in my size, and as it can't possibly make me larger, it must make me smaller, I suppose. So she swallowed one of the cakes, and was delighted to find that she began shrinking directly. And as soon as she was small enough to get through the door, she ran out of the house and found quite a crowd of little animals and birds waiting outside. The poor little lizard Bill, who was in the middle, being held by 2 guinea pigs, who were giving it something out of a bottle. They all made a rush at Alice the moment she appeared, but she ran off as hard as she could, and soon found herself safe in a thick wood. First thing I've got to do, said Alice to herself, as she wandered about in the wood, is to grow to my right size again. The second thing is to find my way into that lovely garden. I think that will be the best plan. It sounded like an excellent plan, no doubt, and very neatly and simply arranged. The only difficulty was that she had not the smallest idea how to set about it, and while she was peering about anxiously among the trees, a sharp little bark just over her head made her look up in a great hurry. An enormous puppy was looking down at her, with large round eyes, and feebly stretching out one paw, trying to touch her. Poor little thing, said Alex in a coaxing tone. And she tried hard to whistle at it, but she was terribly frightened all the time at that point, and thought that it might be hungry, in which case it would be very likely to eat her up in spite of all her coaxing. Hardly knowing what she did, she picked up a little bit of stick, and she held it out to the puppy, whereupon the puppy jumped into the air off its feet at once, with a yelp of delight, and rushed at the stick, and made believe to worry it. Then Alice dodged behind a great thistle to keep herself from being run over, and the moment she appeared on the other side, the puppy made another rush at the stick, and tumbled head over heels in its hurry to get a hold of it. Then Alice, thinking that it was very like having a game of play with a cart horse, and expected every moment to be trampled under its feet, ran around the thistle again. Then the puppy began a series of short charges at the stick, running a little ways forwards every time and a long ways back, and barking hoarsely all the while, till at last it sat down a good way off, panting with its tongue hanging out of its mouth, and its great eyes half shut. This seemed to Alice a good opportunity for making her escape, so she set off at once, and ran till she was quite tired and out of breath, until the puppy's bark sounded quite faint in the distance. And yet what a dear little puppy it was, thought Alice, as she leaned against a buttercup to rest herself, and fanned herself with one of the leaves. I should have liked teaching it tricks very much, if only I had been the right size to do it. Oh dear, I'd nearly forgotten that I've got to grow up again. Let me see, how is it to be managed? I suppose I ought to eat or drink something or other, but the great question is, what? The great question certainly was what. Alice looked all around at the flowers and the blades of grass, but she could not see anything that looked like the right thing to eat or drink under the circumstances. There was a large mushroom growing near her, about the same height as herself, and she had looked underneath it, and on both sides of it, and behind it, it occurred to her that she might as well look and see what was on top of it. She stretched herself up on tiptoe, and peeped over the edge of her mushroom, and her eyes immediately met those of a large blue caterpillar, who was sitting on top of it with its arms folded, quietly smoking a long hookah, and taking not the smallest notice of her, or anything else.